David had always been the guy who asked too many questions. Growing up in a small town in Colorado, he spent his childhood taking apart radios just to see how they worked. His neighbors called him curious, his teachers called him troublesome, but his curiosity led him to become one of the best engineers the military had ever seen. After 8 years of service, David left the Army and started exploring abandoned places. Old factories, empty hospitals, forgotten subway tunnels. He loved finding places that time had forgotten. He had a popular blog where he shared photos and stories from these forgotten corners of America. His followers loved his detailed posts about the history behind each location. One Tuesday morning in March, David woke up to find an unusual message in his email. No sender name, no profile picture, just a blank account. The message was short. Nevada coordinates 37.241N, 116.04113W. Underground. They left something behind. Check the old research campus. David stared at his computer screen, drinking his morning coffee. He got weird messages all the time from people claiming they knew about secret places. Most of them were just pranks or people trying to get attention. But something about this one felt different. The coordinates were exact, professional. Someone had taken time to be precise. He spent the next hour researching those coordinates online. The location showed an empty patch of desert in Nevada, about 2 hours north of Las Vegas. Satellite images revealed the remains of what looked like an old government research facility. Most of the buildings above ground were clearly abandoned, with broken windows and collapsed roofs. But David noticed something odd in the satellite photos. There were several large, rectangular shapes on the ground that looked like concrete pads or foundations. They were arranged in a perfect grid pattern, too organized to be natural. And there were access roads leading to areas where no buildings stood anymore. His engineering mind started working. You don't build access roads to empty ground. You build them to reach something important. And those concrete pads looked exactly like the kind of foundation work he'd seen for underground facilities during his military days. David tried to find more information about the research campus. Online records showed it had belonged to something called Advanced Systems Research Corporation. Back in the 1990s, the company had government contracts for classified technology development. The facility was officially closed in 2018, with all equipment supposedly removed. But David had learned during his military service that officially closed and actually empty were often two very different things. Government facilities were notorious for leaving sensitive projects behind. When they shut down quickly, the more he researched, the more curious he became. His followers on social media would love a story about exploring an abandoned government research facility. And if there really was something underground, it could be the discovery of a lifetime. 3 days later, David was driving through the Nevada desert with his exploration gear packed in the back of his truck. The March air was still cool, perfect for a long day of exploration. He told his girlfriend Lisa he was going to check out some old mining equipment in California. She worried about his solo adventures, so he learned to keep the more dangerous ones to himself. The research campus was even more interesting up close. The main buildings were definitely abandoned, with walls covered in graffiti and windows broken by years of wind and vandals. But David's trained I noticed details others would miss. The power lines leading to the facility were much larger than needed for the small buildings above ground, and some of the concrete work looked far too recent for a facility that had supposedly been empty since 2018. David spent 2 hours walking around the surface, taking photos and looking for any way to access whatever might be underground. Most of the obvious entrances had been sealed with concrete or steel plates, but behind the largest building, partially hidden by overgrown bushes, he found what he was looking for. An old maintenance tunnel entrance, probably used for utilities, had been secured with a heavy metal grate, but time and weather had done their work. The concrete around the grate had cracked, and David could see that the metal bars were loose enough that someone determined could squeeze through. David checked his equipment one more time. Flashlights, backup batteries, first aid kit, water, energy bars, and his camera. He'd explored hundreds of abandoned places, but something about this one felt different. The silence was complete, like the desert itself was holding its breath. Squeezing through the gap in the grate was harder than it looked, but David managed to get inside. The tunnel was larger than he'd expected, wide enough for a person to walk comfortably. The walls were concrete, professionally built, not the rough work you'd see in a typical maintenance tunnel. After walking for about 10 minutes, the tunnel opened into a much larger space. David's flashlight beam revealed a staircase leading down, and his heart started beating faster. This wasn't just a maintenance tunnel. This was an entrance to something much bigger. The stairs went down for what felt like forever. David counted each step to keep track of how deep he was going. 50 steps, 100, 150. He was definitely descending into a major underground facility. At the bottom of the stairs, David found himself in a hallway that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The walls were smooth metal panels. The ceiling had recessed lighting that was somehow still working, and the air had a strange, clean smell like hospital disinfectant mixed with ozone. This was definitely not a normal research facility. The technology was unlike anything David had seen during his military service. The hallway stretched in both directions, with multiple branching corridors and doors marked with symbols he didn't recognize. David chose to go left, following a corridor that seemed to lead toward the center of the facility. As he walked, he noticed that many of the rooms he passed contained equipment that was still powered on. Computer screens showed scrolling data, machines hummed quietly, and indicator lights blinked in steady patterns. Someone had left this place in a hurry, but they'd left everything running. After 20 minutes of exploration, David found himself in front of an elevator with two buttons. One showed an arrow pointing up, the other pointing down. He was already deep underground, but apparently this facility went even deeper. His curiosity won over his caution. David pressed the down button. The elevator descended for almost a full minute before stopping. When the doors opened, David stepped into what could only be described as a containment area. The hallway here was different, wider, with thicker walls and heavy security doors spaced far apart. David walked slowly, his flashlight beam revealing that most of the containment cells were empty. The doors were made of some kind of reinforced material, with small windows that allowed viewing inside. Each cell was large enough to hold a person comfortably, with basic furnishings and what looked like monitoring equipment. At the end of the hallway, in the furthest cell, David's flashlight beam illuminated something that made him freeze in place. Someone was in there. The figure was sitting on a simple bench, but even in the dim light, David could see this wasn't a normal person. The body was tall and thin, with arms and legs that seemed slightly too long. The skin appeared to have a faint, pale luminescence, like moonlight on water. As David stepped closer to the reinforced window, the figure looked up, and their eyes met. The eyes were large, intelligent, and unmistakably aware. This wasn't some kind of mannequin or test dummy. This was a living being, and it was looking directly at him with an expression of surprise and something that might have been hoped out. When the figure stood up, David could see it was female in general form, though clearly not human. She moved to the window and placed her hand against the glass from inside. Her mouth moved, and though the words were quiet, David heard them clearly through some kind of communication system built into the cell. "You came back." The words hit David like a physical blow. The voice was soft, musical, definitely female, and spoke English with perfect clarity. But it was the emotion in those three words that shook him most: relief, joy, desperate hope, as if she'd been waiting specifically for him to return. But David had never been to this place before in his life. He was absolutely certain of that. So why did this mysterious woman seem to know him? And why did looking at her fill him with a strange sense of familiarity, like seeing a friend after a long absence? David stared at the woman behind the reinforced glass, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Who was she? What was this place really? And most importantly, why did he feel like he'd been here before when he knew that was impossible? The woman continued to look at him with those large, intelligent eyes, And David realized that finding this place hadn't been the end of his adventure. It was just the beginning. David couldn't sleep. It had been 3 days since he left the underground facility. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, those large, intelligent eyes staring at him through the reinforced glass, the way she had said you came, back like she'd been waiting for him specifically. But the strangest part wasn't what he remembered from being there. It was what he remembered that never happened. The dreams started the night after he returned home, but they weren't normal dreams. They felt like memories, except they weren't his memories. In these dreams, he was walking through corridors that looked similar to the underground facility. But everything was different. The walls were brighter, the technology looked more advanced. And he wasn't a lone dot in the dreams, the woman was there. With him, she wasn't behind glass or locked away. They were walking side by side, talking like old friends. She was showing him things, explaining how strange machines worked. He could understand her perfectly, even though sometimes she spoke in a language that didn't sound like anything from Earth. The weird part was how natural it all felt. In the dreams, being with her felt normal, like coming home after a long trip. But when David woke up, he couldn't remember ever meeting her before that day in the facility. David tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, maybe seeing something so unusual had affected his mind. But the dreams were too detailed, too consistent, and they felt too real to be just his brain making things up. By the fourth day, David knew he needed answers. He started researching everything he could find about the facility. Online searches led him to old government documents, most of them heavily censored with black marks covering important information. But he found enough pieces to start putting together a picture. The facility had been part of something called Project Stellar Bridge. Most of the documents were classified, but David found references to recovered extraterrestrial assets and consciousness bridging experiments. The project had been shut down suddenly in 2021, with all personnel reassigned and all equipment supposedly destroyed. But David had been there. The equipment definitely hadn't been destroyed. The more he dug, the more disturbed he became. Some of the document fragments mentioned using military personnel as test subjects. They talked about memory modification and consciousness transfer experiments. Reading those words made David's stomach turn cold. During his military service, there had been a 6-month period that David couldn't remember clearly. He'd always assumed it was because of a training accident that gave him a concussion. His commanding officers told him he'd been in the hospital, and when he recovered, he was assigned to different duties. David had never questioned it because military life was full of situations where you didn't get complete explanations. But now he was starting to wonder if that missing time was connected to what he'd found in the facility. David needed to talk to someone who knew about Project Stellar Bridge. After days of searching through academic databases and government employee listings, he found a name, Dr. Elena Vasquez. She had published several papers on consciousness research before 2021, and then suddenly stopped. Her current job was listed as a psychology professor at a small university in Arizona. David drove to Arizona without calling ahead. He was afraid that if he contacted Dr. Vasquez first, she might refuse to see him. Instead, he waited outside her office after her last class of the day. Dr. Vasquez was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. When David introduced himself and mentioned Project Stellar Bridge, her face went completely white. "I can't talk about that," she said immediately, looking around nervously. "I signed agreements. I could go to prison. I found the facility." David said quietly, "It's not shut down. Someone is still there, and I think she recognized me." Dr. Vasquez stared at him for a long moment. Then she grabbed his arm and pulled him into her office, quickly closing the door behind them. "You shouldn't have gone there," she said. "It's dangerous. They have security systems that could have hurt you badly." "Who is she?" David asked. "The woman in the containment cell?" Dr. Vasquez sat down heavily in her chair. She looked like she was fighting with herself about whether to answer. Her designation was Subject 7, she finally said, but she had a name in her own language. Something like Zara, though that's not exactly right. Human mouths can't make the sounds properly. What is she? She's not from here, Dr. Vasquez said quietly. Her ship was recovered in 2018. She was the only survivor, and she was badly injured. Instead of trying to help her or communicate with her properly, the military decided to study her. David felt sick. Study her how? The consciousness. Bridging experiments. They wanted to understand how her mind worked, how her species processes information and memory. They tried to create connections between human consciousness and hers. Using military personnel as test subjects, David said, remembering the documents. He found Dr. Vasquez nodded sadly. You were one of them, weren't you? I remember your name from the files. David Martinez, combat engineer. Excellent psychological profile for consciousness integration. The room felt like it was spinning. David sat down hard in the chair across from her desk. What did they do to me? They created a bridge between your consciousness and hers. For several months, you shared memories, experiences, even emotions. The goal was to learn about her species through that connection. But something unexpected happened. What? You started caring about each other. Real emotional attachment developed through the consciousness bridge. Her species experiences relationships differently than humans. But the connection was genuine for both of you. The scientists weren't prepared for that. David thought about the dreams, the sense of familiarity he'd felt when he saw her. That's why she recognized me. When the project was shut down, they tried to erase the memories from both of you. Her species is more resistant to memory modification than humans, so she retained more of the connection. Your memories were mostly suppressed, but not completely erased. Being near her again probably triggered them to start coming back. She's been locked up there for 3 years, David said, feeling anger building in his chest. She's dying, Dr. Vasquez said quietly. Her species requires certain environmental conditions that the facility can't provide. They've been trying to keep her alive for study, but she's getting weaker. I estimate she has maybe a few weeks left. David stood up abruptly. I have to get her out of there. David, you can't. The facility has automated security systems, and even if you could get her out, where would you take her? She needs specialized care. There has to be something we can do. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the desk. There might be a way, she said finally, but it would be extremely dangerous, and I could lose everything if we get caught. Tell me, I still have access codes for some of the facility systems, and I know how to operate the equipment that's keeping her alive. If we could get her out into a safe location, I might be able to stabilize her condition long enough to figure out a permanent solution. David felt hope for the first time. Since leaving the facility, what would we need to do? First, we need to plan this carefully. The facility has motion sensors and automated defenses that activate if they detect unauthorized personnel. But there's a maintenance window every Tuesday night when some of the systems shut down. For updates, that would be our best chance. When is the next Tuesday? 5 days from now. But David, you need to understand what you're risking. This isn't just about breaking into a government facility. If they catch us, we'll disappear just like she did. And even if we succeed, your life will never be normal again. Once you help her, you'll be on the run from people with unlimited resources and no respect for the law. David thought about the woman in the cell, about the connection he felt with her even though he couldn't fully remember their time together. He thought about the dreams where they walked together like friends, where she trusted him completely. She's been waiting for me, he said. She said you came back like she knew I would return for her. The consciousness bridge created a bond between you that transcends normal human relationships. She believes in you, David. The question is whether you're ready to believe in something bigger than yourself. David looked out the window at the Arizona desert. Somewhere out there, in a facility that wasn't supposed to exist, a woman from another world was dying alone. She had been waiting for him to come back, trusting that their connection meant something. I'm ready, David said. Tell me what we need to do. Dr. Vasquez opened her laptop and began pulling up files she'd hidden for 3 years. Waiting for this moment, we're going to need specialized equipment, detailed facility maps, and a safe house where no one will think to look for us. And David, yes, once we do this, there's no going back. Your normal life ends the moment we walk into that facility together. David thought about his girlfriend Lisa, his comfortable apartment, his blog followers who enjoyed reading about his adventures. All of that would have to be left behind. But when he thought about the woman in the cell, about the trust in her eyes when she saw him, he knew there was really no choice at all. Then let's make sure we do it right the first time. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. David spent every waking hour going over the rescue plan with Dr. Vasquez. They met in different coffee shops around Phoenix, never the same place twice. Always careful to look like to people having normal conversations. Dr. Vasquez had managed to get hold of equipment they'd need. Portable life support devices, energy packs that could power the cell door systems, and something she called a consciousness stabilizer. David didn't fully understand how it worked, but she explained it would help Zara stay coherent during the rescue. Her species uses a different kind of energy than humans. Dr. Vasquez explained during one of their planning meetings, being cut off from her natural environment for so long has weakened not just her body, but her mind. Without the stabilizer, the stress of escape might cause her to lose consciousness completely. David had been having more dreams every night, and then Zara was teaching him about her world. He saw cities that looked like they were made of light, beings who could share thoughts and feelings as easily as humans shared conversation. In one dream, she showed him her ship, a beautiful craft that moved through space like a living thing. But the dreams also showed him why she was here. Her people had been watching Earth for generations, waiting for the right time to make peaceful contact. Zara had been part of a small diplomatic mission, coming in secret to study human culture and determine if people were ready to learn. They weren't alone in the universe. The mission had gone wrong when a military radar system detected their ship. Instead of trying to communicate, a secret government group had shot them down and captured the only survivor. On Monday night, David couldn't eat dinner. His stomach was twisted in knots thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if the security systems had been upgraded? What if Zara was too weak to travel? What if they got caught and ended up in cells right next to hers? Dr. Vasquez called him at 9 o'clock. "I just received some bad news," she said, her voice tense. "I still have contacts in the government scientific community. Word is that the facility is scheduled for final sterilization this Friday." David's blood went cold. What does that mean? It means they're going to destroy everything inside, including any remaining test subjects. "David, if we don't get her out tomorrow night, she's going to die on Friday." David stared at his ceiling, feeling the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. Zara had been waiting for him to come back, trusting that their connection meant he would save her, and he had less than 48 hours to make that happen. "We stick to the plan," David said. "Tomorrow night, no matter what." Tuesday felt like the longest day of David's life. He tried to act normal, responding to emails about his blog, cleaning his apartment, even calling Lisa to check in. But his mind was entirely focused on that night. At 11 p.m., David met Dr. Vasquez at a gas station 20 miles from the facility. She looked as nervous as he felt, but she brought everything they needed. The equipment filled to large backpacks, and she'd even brought night vision goggles. The maintenance window starts at midnight and lasts exactly 2 hours, she reminded him as they drove toward the facility. The motion sensors in the main corridors will be offline, but the containment level still has backup security. We'll have to move quickly and quietly. Getting into the facility was easier the second time. David knew exactly where to find them. Loose grate, and Dr. Vasquez followed him through the maintenance tunnel without complaint. But when they reached the main level, David noticed something different. The facility felt more active than before. More lights were on, and he could hear sounds, footsteps, machinery, voices in the distance, the cleanup crew. Dr. Vasquez whispered. They must have started early preparation for Friday's sterilization. They had to hide twice as groups of workers walked past, carrying equipment and talking in low voices. David's heart hammered in his chest every time they came close to being discovered. Finally, they reached the elevator to the containment level. Dr. Vasquez used her access card, and they descended into the deeper part of the facility. The containment level was darker than David remembered, with only emergency lighting providing dim red illumination. They moved quickly down the corridor, past the empty cells toward the one at the end. Zara was there, but she looked much weaker than before. She was lying on the bench, and for a terrifying moment, David thought they might be too late. But when their footsteps approached, she sat up and looked toward them. When she saw David, her face lit up with relief and something that looked like joy. "I knew you would return," she said softly. Her voice was weaker than before, but still musical and clear. Dr. Vasquez immediately got to work on the cell door controls. "The electronic locks are more complex than I expected," she muttered, connecting her equipment to various panels. "This is going to take longer than planned." While she worked, David pressed his hand against the reinforced window. Zara did the same from inside, and when their hands aligned through the glass, David felt something extraordinary happen. Images flashed through his mind, memories of their time together. During the consciousness-bridging experiments, he remembered walking with her through the facility, learning about her world, sharing thoughts and experiences that created a bond deeper than anything he'd ever felt with another person. "I remember," he whispered. "The memories were never truly gone," Zara said. "Just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to return." "Got it?" Dr. Vasquez announced as the cell door clicked open. David rushed inside, and Zara stood up slowly. She was taller than he'd realized, probably close to 6 feet, with the graceful movements of someone who wasn't quite used to Earth's gravity. Up close, her skin had an otherworldly beauty, with faint patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light. But she was clearly weak. When she tried to walk, her legs shook, and David had to catch her to keep her from falling. "The consciousness stabilizer," Dr. Vasquez said, handing David a device that looked like a small headband with lights on it. "It will help her maintain focus during the journey." David gently placed the device on Zara's forehead. The lights immediately began pulsing in a steady rhythm, and she seemed to gain strength. "Thank you," Zara said to Dr. Vasquez. "I know what risks you are taking to help me. We need to move," Dr. Vasquez replied. "The maintenance window ends in 40 minutes, supporting Zara between them." They made their way back toward the elevator, but as they waited for it to arrive, they heard something that made David's stomach drop. Alarms, loud, urgent alarms echoing through the facility. Motion sensors on the upper levels must have detected something, Dr. Vasquez said, her face pale. The elevator arrived, but when the doors opened, they could hear voices and footsteps above them. The cleanup crew had noticed something was wrong. "There's another way out," Zara said weakly, "a service tunnel that leads to the surface. I learned about it during my time here." She directed them to a maintenance hatch at the far end of the containment level. Dr. Vasquez used her access card again, and the hatch opened to reveal a narrow tunnel that angled upward. The tunnel was a tight fit, and they had to move slowly. Because Zara was still weak, behind them, they could hear security teams entering the containment level, searching the cells. "They know she's gone," David whispered. "Keep moving," Dr. Vasquez urged. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. David's knees were scraped raw from crawling, and his shoulders ached from helping support Zara's weight. But finally, they saw natural light ahead. The tunnel opened into a small concrete structure that looked like a utility building. Dr. Vasquez's car was parked just 50 yards away, exactly where they'd planned. But as they emerged from the building, David heard something that made his blood run cold. Helicopters, at least 2 of them, approaching fast from the direction of the main facility. "Run!" Dr. Vasquez shouted. They ran across the open ground toward the car, David and Dr. Vasquez supporting Zara between them. The helicopters were getting closer, their searchlights beginning to sweep the area. They reached the car just as the first searchlight beam swept across the utility building they'd just left. Dr. Vasquez started the engine and floored the accelerator, sending dirt and rocks flying as they sped away into the desert. In the back seat, Zara was breathing heavily but conscious. The consciousness stabilizer was still working, keeping her alert despite her physical exhaustion. "Where are we going?" David asked as they drove through the darkness. "Safe house," Dr. Vasquez replied. "A place I prepared for emergencies. They won't think to look there." David looked back at Zara, who was watching the dessert pass by through the window. They had done it. They had actually rescued her from the facility. But as the helicopters continued to search behind them, David knew this was just the beginning. Now they had to keep her alive, help her recover, and figure out what came next. "How long until they find us?" he asked. "Not long," Dr. Vasquez said grimly. "They have unlimited resources and advanced tracking technology. We've bought ourselves some time, but not much." David reached back and took Zara's hand. It felt warm and slightly different from human skin, but the connection between them was stronger than ever. "We'll figure it out," he said to both women in the car. "Whatever it takes, we'll keep you safe." The safe house was an old cabin hidden in the mountains of northern Arizona, surrounded by thick pine trees and miles from the nearest road. Dr. Vasquez had bought it years ago under a fake name, preparing for the day she might need to disappear. Completely. David helped Zara out of the car, still amazed that they had actually escaped. She moved slowly, but she was stronger than she'd been in the facility. The consciousness stabilizer was working, keeping her mind clear even though her body was still recovering from 3 years of captivity. Inside the cabin, Dr. Vasquez had already set up medical equipment, monitors for bags, and machines David didn't recognize. She'd been planning this rescue for longer than she'd admitted to him. "How long have you been preparing for this?" David asked as he helped Zara sit on the makeshift medical bed. "Since the day they shut down the project," Dr. Vasquez replied, connecting monitoring leads to Zara's arms. "I knew someone would eventually find that facility, and I hoped whoever it was would have the courage to help her." Over the next few hours, Dr. Vasquez worked to stabilize Zara's condition while David watched. Feeling helpless but amazed, Zara's body was similar to human biology in some ways, but different in others. Her heart rate was much slower, and her body temperature was several degrees cooler than normal for humans. Her species evolved on a planet with different atmospheric conditions. Dr. Vasquez explained as she worked. The facility was slowly poisoning her just by keeping her in our air. She needs a different mix of gases to be truly healthy. Can you fix that? I've been working on portable atmospheric processors for 3 years. It won't be perfect, but it should help her recover enough to regain her strength. As Dr. Vasquez set up the atmospheric equipment, David sat beside Zara's bed. She was awake, but resting, the consciousness stabilizer still glowing softly on her forehead. "I want to understand," David said quietly. "During the experiments, what was it like sharing consciousness with me?" Zara turned to look at him, and her large eyes held an expression of warmth. That made David's heart skip. "Your species experiences relationships through words and actions," she said, her voice stronger now than in the facility. "My people share consciousness directly. We feel what others feel, know what they know. When they bridged our minds, I experienced David Martinez, not just as a person, but as a complete being. Your memories, your emotions, your dreams, your fears, they all became part of me. That must have been overwhelming. At first, yes. Human consciousness is different from ours, more chaotic, but also more creative. Your people think in ways mine never learned to. But as the connection grew stronger, I began to understand and appreciate those differences." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her work. "The fascinating part is that the connection affected you too, David. Your brain patterns during the experiments showed increased activity in areas related to empathy and emotional processing. She was teaching you to think more like her species, while learning to think like yours." David thought about the dreams he'd been having, the sense of familiarity he'd felt with Zara. "Is that why I felt like I knew you when I found you in the cell?" The human scientists tried to erase our shared memories, but consciousness connections can't be completely broken once they're formed. Part of me remained in your mind, and part of you remained in mine. When you saw me again, those connections reactivated, so we're still connected now." Zara reached for his hand when their skin touched. David felt a warm sensation, like a gentle electrical current. Images flashed through his mind, not memories this time, but emotions, gratitude, affection, hope, and something deeper that he couldn't quite name. The connection is stronger now than before. Zara said softly. Shared danger and trust have deepened it. Dr. Vasquez finished setting up the atmospheric processor, and immediately the air in the cabin began to smell different, cleaner somehow, with a faint metallic scent. That should help, she said. But Zara, we need to talk about what happens next. The government will be looking for us. They have satellite tracking, facial recognition software, and resources we can't compete with. This cabin is hidden, but not invisible. How long do we have? David asked. Days? Maybe a week if we're lucky. But there's something else you both need to know. I've been in contact with other researchers who worked on consciousness bridging technology. There are people in the government who want to restart the project, but there are also people who want to bury it completely. What's the difference? Zara asked. The ones who want to restart it see her as a resource to be used. Dr. Vasquez explained. They want to continue the experiments, maybe even find her people and capture more of them. But the ones who want to bury the project see her as a threat that needs to be eliminated. David felt cold fear creep up his spine. Eliminated? They're afraid that if news of her existence gets out, it will cause panic or change the balance of power globally. Some people would rather pretend alien life doesn't exist than deal with the complications of first contact. Zara was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, she spoke. My people are still here, watching from a ship hidden beyond your moon. They believe I died in the crash 3 years ago, but our consciousness connection technology works across vast distances. If I can get close enough to space, I might be able to contact them. Contact them how? David asked. My species doesn't communicate the way yours does. We share thoughts and feelings directly, mind to mind. But I would need to be much higher in your atmosphere. To reach them, perhaps on one of your space stations, or at least in a high-altitude aircraft. Dr. Vasquez looked thoughtful. There might be a way. I have a contact who works for a private space company. They launch research equipment into the upper atmosphere regularly. If we could get Zara onto one of those flights, that sounds incredibly dangerous, David said. Everything we're doing is dangerous, Dr. Vasquez replied. But it might be our only option. If Zara's people think she's dead, they're probably preparing to leave Earth's system permanently. This could be the last chance to contact them. David looked at Zara, who was considering the proposal carefully. What would happen if you contacted them? He asked. They would come for me, but their arrival would also reveal their presence too. Your governments, that could lead to conflict. Or it could lead to the peaceful contact my diplomatic mission was originally meant to establish. Which one? That depends on how your people react to learning they're not alone in the universe. David thought about everything he'd learned over the past week. Government cover-ups, secret experiments, the willingness to imprison an innocent being for years just to study her. He wasn't sure humanity was ready for peaceful contact with alien life. But then he looked at Zara, at the trust and hope in her alien features, and he realized that maybe the question wasn't whether humanity was ready. Maybe the question was whether they deserved the chance to try. Over the next 2 days, they planned their next move while Zara recovered her strength. The atmospheric processor was working. Her skin looked healthier, and she was able to walk around the cabin without help. More importantly, her mind was clearer, and the consciousness connection between her and David was growing stronger. During quiet moments, she shared more about her world and her people. They lived on a planet with 3 suns, where the concept of individual ownership didn't exist because everyone could share consciousness and understand each other's needs completely. Their technology was based on biological principles rather than mechanical ones. Their ships were grown rather than built, and their computers were living organisms rather than electronic devices. Your people would find our world very strange, Zara said as they sat together watching the sunset through the cabin window. Probably. David agreed. But maybe that's okay. Maybe strange isn't necessarily bad. The consciousness bridging experiments taught me that differences can create strength rather than division. Your chaotic human thinking, combined with our ordered consciousness sharing, created something neither species had experienced before. David felt the warmth of their connection as she shared that thought. It was true. Their relationship, whatever it was, felt like something entirely new. But their peaceful recovery was interrupted on the third day by Dr. Vasquez bursting into the cabin. With news. We have to leave, she said, her face pale with fear. Now, I just got word from my contact at the space company. Government agents have been asking questions about atmospheric research flights. They're closing in. David looked out the window and saw dust clouds in the distance, vehicles approaching through the forest. How long do we have? Maybe 10 minutes before they reached the cabin. Zara stood up, her movements now strong and confident. Then it's time to contact my people, whether we're ready or not. As they gathered their essential equipment and prepared to flee again, David realized that their time of healing and planning was over. Now they had to make the most important decision of both their lives and possibly of human history. The sound of helicopters filled the air as they loaded their equipment into Dr. Vasquez's car. David could see government vehicles approaching through the trees. Still a few miles away, but getting closer fast. The private airfield is 30 minutes. From here, Dr. Vasquez said as they drove down the mountain road at dangerous speeds. My contact Rodriguez has a high-altitude research plane ready for immediate takeoff. But David, once we do this, there's no going back. In the passenger seat, Zara was using her consciousness connection abilities to stay calm despite the chaos around them. Through their shared bond, David could feel her determination mixed with sadness. What's wrong? He asked her. I've been thinking about what happens after I contact my people, she said quietly. If they come to retrieve me, they'll want to leave Earth immediately. They've been watching your planet for generations, waiting for the right time to make peaceful contact. My capture and imprisonment will convince them that humans aren't ready. David felt his heart sink, and all their planning to help Zara escape and contact her people. He hadn't fully considered what that meant for their relationship. So, this is goodbye, he asked. It doesn't have to be, Dr. Vasquez said from the driver's seat. Zara, tell him about the alternative. Zara was quiet for a moment, then turned to face David. There's another possibility. If I contact my people and convince them to stay, to give humanity another chance at peaceful contact, they might agree. But it would require proof that some humans are ready for cooperation rather than domination. What kind of proof? You, David. Your willingness to risk everything to help someone from another world, with no expectation of reward. The consciousness connection we've shared. That proves humans can learn to understand beings different from themselves. You could be the example that changes their minds about your species. David stared out the window, processing what she was saying. You want me to go with you? To meet your people? I want you to choose. Your people or mine? Earth or the stars? A normal life or an adventure that could change the worlds? Before David could respond, his phone buzzed with an emergency alert. Dr. Vasquez's radio crackled to life at the same time. This is a federal emergency broadcast, the voice said. All aircraft in the southwestern United States are grounded immediately. Military jets are conducting exercises in all airspace. Any unauthorized flights will be intercepted. They're shutting down the entire region, Dr. Vasquez said grimly. They know what we're planning. David felt panic rising in his chest. So what do? We stick to the plan, Zara said firmly. My people's ship moves in a predictable orbit. I have a window of exactly 43 minutes when they'll be close enough to Earth for consciousness contact. If we miss it, they'll be too far away for weeks. They reached the private airfield to find Rodriguez, Dr. Vasquez's contact, waiting beside a small but sophisticated research aircraft. He was a nervous-looking man in his 40s, who kept checking his watch. This is insane, Rodriguez said as they approached. I just got word that F-16 fighter jets are patrolling the area. If they catch us in the air without authorization, they'll shoot us down. How long to reach the altitude Zara needs? Dr. Vasquez asked. 15 minutes to get high enough for atmospheric research work. But I don't know if that's high enough for whatever it is she's planning to do. Zara closed her eyes and seemed to be concentrating. I can feel them, she said softly. Their ship is approaching the optimal position. 40,000 feet should be sufficient for consciousness. Contact, we can reach that, Rodriguez said. But we'll have maybe 10 minutes before military aircraft intercept us. David looked at Zara, at Dr. Vasquez, at the small plane that represented their only chance. Everything they'd worked for came down to this moment. There's something else, Zara said, taking David's hand. The consciousness connection I'll need to establish with my people. It requires enormous mental energy. The process might erase the connection between you and me permanently. David felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. What do you mean? To reach across space to my people's minds, I'll need to use all of my consciousness bridging ability, the connection we've built together. All the memories and feelings we share might be sacrificed to make contact with them. So even if I choose to stay on Earth, I'll lose you anyway. You'll lose the connection, but not the memories of our time together. Those will remain as normal human memories. Dr. Vasquez checked her watch. We need to decide now. The window is closing. David's mind raced through everything that had happened since he received that first anonymous email, finding Zara, learning about their connection, rescuing her from the facility. The dreams and shared consciousness that had shown him possibilities he'd never imagined. He thought about his old life, his apartment, his girlfriend Lisa, his blog about exploring abandoned places. That life felt like it belonged to a different person now. If I go with you, David said to Zara, what happens to me? Can humans survive on your world? Our medical technology could adapt your biology to our environment. But David, you would never be able to return to Earth, and you would be the first human my people have ever welcomed as an equal rather than studied as a specimen. And if you stay here to help establish peaceful contact, I would need to convince my people that Earth is beings worthy of trust and cooperation. It might take years, and there's no guarantee your governments wouldn't try to capture me again. The sound of jets flying overhead interrupted their conversation. Military aircraft were definitely in the area. Whatever we're doing, we need to do it now, Rodriguez said nervously. David looked at Zara, beautiful and alien and trusting, waiting for his decision. Through their consciousness connection, he could feel her emotions, hope, fear, love, and something deeper that transcended species boundaries. Dr. Vasquez, David said suddenly, what was the real goal of the original Stellar Bridge project? To establish communication with alien species for mutual benefit, she replied. To prove that different forms of consciousness could work together rather than against each other. Then let's finish what you started. David turned to Zara. Contact your people. Tell them that some humans are ready for peaceful contact. Show them our connection as proof. But ask them to stay, to give us a chance to do this right. And if they refuse, then I'll go with you. But let's try to build a bridge between our worlds before we give up on either one. Zara smiled, an expression that was both alien and perfectly human in its warmth. Together, she said, squeezing his hand. They boarded Rodriguez's plane as the sun began to set over the Arizona desert. As they climbed toward the upper atmosphere, David felt the consciousness connection between him and Zara growing stronger, preparing for what might be its greatest test. At 40,000 feet, with military jets approaching from the east and stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, Zara closed her eyes and reached out with her mind toward her people's ship. David held her hand and felt the connection between them pulse with energy. As she made contact with minds light years away from home, they hear me, she whispered, and through our connection, they can sense you too. David felt his consciousness expand beyond anything he'd ever experienced. For a moment, he was connected not just to Zara, but to an entire civilization of beings who thought and felt and loved in ways both alien and familiar. In that moment of connection, David understood that their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Below them, the lights of human cities sparkled in the darkness. Above them, invisible to human eyes, a ship from another world waited to see if the species could learn to understand each other. The choice had been made. Now all that remained was to see if love could truly transcend the stars, 6 months later, David stood in a United Nations Assembly Hall, translating between human diplomats and Zara's people, as they signed the first interstellar peace treaty. In human history, the consciousness connection between him and Zara had survived her contact with her people, evolved into something new, a permanent bridge between two worlds, sometimes late at night. When Zara was teaching human scientists about her people's medical technology, David would remember that first moment when she looked at him through the reinforced glass and whispered, "You came back." She had been right to wait for him, and he had been right to come back for her. Their love story had become the foundation for something much larger, proof that understanding could overcome fear, that cooperation could replace conflict, and that sometimes the most important choice is simply choosing to trust someone who seems different from yourself. The stars no longer seemed impossibly far away. They felt like home.